Hello, Glen Sample here. Welcome to Chapter 20 of The Men on the Sixth Floor, the Mac Wallace Fingerprint. Now, this is such an important chapter. It's full of action. I hope you enjoy it. I enjoyed making it. I enjoyed researching and writing about it too. It was quite an experience. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to put a link to another video where I interview Nathan Darby, the fingerprint expert. We had a nice 30-minute conversation. It's all recorded 20 years ago almost, yeah. And so stick around for that. You'll enjoy that. That's after the chapter 20 is finished. Now, Nathan Darby, of course, was a professional fingerprint expert that linked Malcolm Wallace to the 6th floor of the Schoolbook Depository. And it's a very controversial fingerprint. Some people believe that it's definitely original and authentic. Others have doubts, but see what you think. There's going to be photographs of the fingerprints if you'd like to look at them and try to be a fingerprint expert yourself. But we hope you enjoy the chapter, and then we hope you enjoy the interview. So interesting with this wonderful man who passed away a few years ago. Enjoy. Thank you.
The Men on the Sixth Floor. Chapter 20. The Mac Wallace Fingerprint. It was little more than a smudge. For that reason, this particular fingerprint was determined to be unidentified, or perhaps unidentifiable, and was filed away in the National Archives for over 35 years, along with hundreds of other Warren Commission exhibits, until its appearance and identity was clarified in 1998. The print in question was found on Box A, the designation given to the box of books that supposedly served as a rifle rest for Lee Harvey Oswald. But this particular print, Box A, print number 29, was not that of Oswald. Neither did it match the employees of the book depository or any of the police, FBI, or Secret Service agents who swarmed over the building within minutes of the assassination. How this fingerprint was discovered, analyzed, and eventually matched with a 1951 fingerprint card of Malcolm Wallace is an interesting story, and the impelling force behind this matchup was, of all people, an ex-Dallas cop. The fingerprints that covered the boxes, piled strategically in the sniper's nest, became the study for a man who made the Kennedy assassination his life's work. To say he was a researcher is a statement that is less than complete. J. Harrison was, on November 22, 1963, a Dallas policeman who within 5 minutes of the shooting of the president was at the scene of the crime. I met Jay online in 1996, sometime after The Men on the Sixth Floor was published. The book, rich in detail about Malcolm Everett Wallace, was the reason why Jay contacted me. He was obsessed with Mac Wallace, and I guess I was too. He wrote, "I believe that you and I have more than one thing in common. Malcolm Everett Wallace, a man of many interests and vocations and friends, among other attributes and faults, and ignored by most historians, and more importantly, ignored by probable mis- or disinformation sources. I buy very few conspiracy books until such time as I can acquire them at the $1 or $2 special closeout section at half-price books here in Austin. 2 authors recently released their works. Jim Hosty, a fictional writer, in parentheses, claiming a inaccurate space in the nonfiction historical world, and Assignment Oswald, Arcade Publishing, 1996, $25.95. Note, way overpriced for a fictional account of some of the events that took place in October through December of '63, and two hitherto unknown guys from California named Sample and Column, who co-authored a yet-to-be-recognized historic classic. Reading this book was quite an experience for me. With the exception of the material on Loy Factor, a person then unknown to me, I had the strangest feeling that somebody was accessing my database. I learned from my correspondence and phone conversations with Jay that his depth of research was phenomenal, and his history as a researcher was legend, but only to a few. He was very cautious about his work on the assassination, always working in the shadows, under the radar. No doubt he held the record for the number of years spent investigating the Kennedy murder, and it was evident that he was proud of it. He wrote, "I was a reserve on the Dallas Police Department, assigned to the Criminal Intelligence Section on the day of the assassination. I joined the department in early 1961 and left it in 1968. My Dallas Police Department ID was 858, and my badge was number 125. I was the first reserve officer to receive the Certificate of Merit from the Dallas Police Department, a very prestigious award, as a direct result of my research and undercover work on the left and right wings. I was at the Texas Schoolbook Depository within 5 minutes of the event. I had the Black Muslim Church under surveillance during the motorcade. It was about a half a mile away from the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Subsequently, I was on the guard team for Governor Connally, and on Sunday morning I was in the basement of City Hall, involved in the security for the transfer of Oswald to the County Sheriff's Department. I am identified in the Warren Commission, Volume 12, page 356, line 16. This is the testimony of Sergeant Donald Francis Steele, who I was with all morning long in Dallas Police Headquarters on Sunday morning, and just prior to, that is 5 minutes before, the shooting of Oswald by Ruby. I drove the car out of the basement that preceded Lieutenant Rio Sam Pierce, that gave the opportunity for Ruby to enter the driveway entrance when the crowd was split to allow our cars to exit. Ruby was still in the Western Union office at the time I left. I personally have met and talked at length to George de Mohrenschildt, Bertha Cheek, George Lincoln Rockwell, Edwin Taylor, the Paynes, Jack Ruby, and knew personally Nick McDonald, J.D. Tippett, Jess Curry, Jack Reville, just to cite a few. My military training and assignments in the U.S. Army during the Korean conflict was in intelligence and communications. My primary MOS was 1766 high-speed radio operator, that is Morse code, and I spent over a year in the Joint Chiefs of Staff Communications Center in the Pentagon. After my active duty, I spent 6 years in the reserves, which was mandatory, and I was assigned to a 6-man SIRA team, Strategic Intelligence Research and Analysis. For over 42 years, I have done genealogical research on specific persons, their families, ancestors, and descendants. That experience has been critical to the establishment of great depth of provable data on the individuals and sub-events that I research in this endeavor. Shortly before Jay's death in May of 2005, he asked Walt Brown to box up his 1 ton of research and take it to New Jersey for safekeeping. Brown's description of Jay Harrison's research records is impressive. When people get a chance to view the materials in the Jay Harrison archive, which I someday hope to be able to scan and put on CDs, they will realize that nobody has ever equaled the meticulous research he did. Mary Farrell was lionized for having a database that involved over 8,000 names. Jay's was over 26,000, and it includes masses of vital records, data, birth certificate, death certificates, blue originals, not Xerox copies, that simply boggle the mind. Hopefully the above gives the reader a clear description of the high-caliber researcher Jay was. Through our communication, he was able to help me with several areas of research, which were included in a later edition of our book. He clarified my mistaken notion that Malcolm Wallace was related to Henry Agard Wallace, former vice president as well as the former Secretary of Agriculture. His excellent genealogical research helped me find and interview Mac Wallace's ex-wife, Virginia Ledgerwood. I benefited greatly from his file on Wallace, which was deep and rich. Looking back on our communications, I see now a subtle hint about the Malcolm Wallace fingerprint. He wrote, "If we are both right, which we are, some knowledge can be potentially very dangerous. You were first to put him there in print. I'm going to prove that he was there!" Exclamation point. It was no doubt during this time that Jay was maneuvering for access to the arrest records of Wallace, including the fingerprint file. He never disclosed any than the above about his project of his. About the same time, 1996, I was also corresponding with Stephen Pegues, a colorful native Texan who was busy writing a book he called The Texas Mafia. Pegues was close to Billy Saul Estes, a longtime friend of the family. Pegues, like Jay, was a great researcher, but also a proud Texas historian. I think it was Stephen who, more than anyone else, helped me understand the thinking of a true Texan.
Billy Saul Estes has been the subject of what has been called one of the greatest controversies in American history. Some people call him a wizard, some people call him a crook. He spoke very candidly with me when I visited him in Abilene, Texas.
What did Robert Kennedy have against you?
Oh, Robert Kennedy had nothing against me personally, or nothing against Lyndon Johnson personally. He wanted to be the most powerful man in the United States and the world, and he was fighting the most powerful man in the world and couldn't win.
Pegues, like Jay, was an early reader of the Men on the Sixth Floor. And, like Jay, Pegues was very interested in Malcolm Wallace. Since it was Billy Saul Estes who first drew the connection between Wallace, LBJ, and the assassination of JFK, naturally Stephen Pegues was knowledgeable in this area and was attracted to the information in our book. It was in fact Pegues who gave me the first of the 4 Estes documents that we later included in a later edition of the book. His source for these important documents is yet another story.
He went right out of college. He went to work for Lyndon Johnson. Well, what precisely could he have been doing for Lyndon Johnson before he went to the ag departure? That's kind of hazy. Dirty deed. Really? Even then? Yeah. Right out of college. Oh, listen, have you seen this book, A Texan Looks at Lyndon? Oh, yeah. 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 I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you a secret. I don't want you to repeat this to anyone. On the 17th, Evans Haley Jr. Is going to open up a file that's been under lock and key since 1962 about Lyndon Johnson and Billy Saul Estes to me. Oh my goodness. I'm going in and they're going to, they have to choose what I can and can't see. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make sure that I'm wired. Because I'm not missing this. I'm a journalist. This is the 17th of this month? Yeah. I'm leaving for Texas in about 4 days. Jeez. I'd like to meet you there.
Because of our common interests, I introduced Stephen Pegues to Jay Harrison. Before long, the two men struck up a friendship and combined their talents. As the story goes, they were successful in setting up an interview with a family member of Malcolm Wallace. This interview was to be on September 3rd, 1997. But that morning, Jay was shocked to find that Stephen had died of a heart attack the night before or early that morning. This was a terrible blow to the normally reclusive Jay Harrison. His reclusiveness transformed into paranoia. He called me the next day to tell me of Stephen's untimely death, shaken, his voice fearful. I remembered a package of notes and clippings that Stephen had just sent me. I grabbed the envelope and looked at the date, August 28th, 1997, 6 days prior to his death. Included in the package was a reply from the Chicago Police Department concerning a Freedom of Information request for information on the death of former Estes business partner Coleman Wade. The letter informed Stephen that no information could be found. A similar letter from the FBI concerning information requested about the deaths of Ike Rogers, Harold Orr, Coleman Wade, Howard Pratt, and Malcolm Wallace. There was no record responsive to the FOIA request. The response was dated August 5th, 1997. The sudden death of Stephen Pegues haunted Jay until the day of his own death in 2005. After Jay's phone call informing me of Stephen's death, our communication ended, but not Jay's determination. Undaunted, Jay Harrison hunted down the object of his obsession, the Mac Wallace fingerprint card. It came after years of legal wrangling with the Austin police authorities. During this period, Jay started working with Bar McClellan, who was busy compiling research for his book, Blood, Money, and Power, How LBJ Killed JFK. McClellan's team of researchers, who included, among others, Walt Brown, was instrumental in pushing the fingerprint project onward. Meanwhile, Mark and I got a tip that there was a group of Texas researchers who had matched a fingerprint found in the Texas Schoolbook Depository with Wallace's fingerprint. Little else was known about this team, but two names of its researchers, Bar McClellan and Jay Harrison. The information that we had was sparse, namely that the TSBD, that is the Texas Schoolbook Depository print, was found on Box A and could possibly be print number 20, number 22, or 29, or all three. The corresponding matching print was from a fingerprint card from Wallace's arrest record. Our excitement was intensified and greatly warranted. Mark and I were faced with the real possibility that Loy Factor's story could become more plausible, even more credible than ever before, based on real forensic evidence. I could not sleep for days. There has never been a doubt in my mind that the Factor story leading to Mac Wallace, LBJ, and the assassination of JFK was true. But now we would be able to prove it. We determined that we would launch an investigation of our own, not to preempt the Texas team, but to satisfy our own curiosity. We had no idea how or when or even if the other team was planning on releasing this information, and it seemed that it would be a simple task. We needed to get Mac Wallace's fingerprint card. From what we knew, Wallace had been arrested in 1951 and fingerprinted by the Austin police. My attempts to get the prints from them were fruitless. We learned that Mac had also been arrested in Dallas on public drunkenness charges in the early 60s. Our attempts to find these records were also disappointing. Attaining the latent fingerprint photos from the National Archives proved to be the easiest part. Finally, we were able to come up with a poor quality copy of the 1951 Wallace print. Our next step was our most faulty. I found an organization called SCAFO, an acronym for Southern California Association of Fingerprint Officers. I emailed several of its members, explaining that I was a writer who was working on a story that involved examining some fingerprints. I invited anyone within the membership to contact me if they were interested in offering their professional opinions. Within a week, 2 or 3 did respond. I was most impressed by a young officer named Mike, who specialized in fingerprint analysis in a nearby police department. He invited me to his office to show him what I had. His superior officer was also curious and joined the conversation. Their curiosity and my desire to have these prints compared influenced me to disclose the nature and source of the fingerprints. The Texas researchers, I later learned, had handled this in an entirely different way by keeping the details of the prints secret, thereby allowing their expert to work blind, without prejudice. The initial examination of the prints convinced the fingerprint officers that they needed better prints. Going against official policy, they contacted Austin and requested the official fingerprint file of Malcolm Wallace, which they quickly obtained. How disappointed we were to hear the words, "Sorry, no match," come from our experts. Their explanation was that the prints were similar and many matching points. There were too many dissimilar elements. The officers also indicated that their superiors advised them to drop the project and not connect the department to it in any shape or fashion. We were not allowed to have the possession of the requested official print, since it was the property of the department. Our fingerprint investigation came to a sad end. Meanwhile, the Texas group held a press conference on May 29, 1998. John Glen was the first to report the details. Quote, "A Texas-based assassination research group has identified a man believed to have left a previously unidentified fingerprint on a box making up the alleged sniper's nest on the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository, from which President Kennedy was allegedly assassinated in 1963. Researcher Walt Brown, speaking on behalf of the Texas group, said at a May 29th press conference in Dallas that the fingerprints belonged to Malcolm E. Mac Wallace, a convicted killer with ties to Lyndon Baines Johnson. Brown presented data showing a 14-point match between Wallace's fingerprint card obtained from the Texas Department of Public Safety and the previously unidentified print, a copy of which was kept in the National Archives. The match was made by A. Nathan Darby, an expert with certification by the International Association of Identifiers. According to members of the research group, this new evidence has been in the hands of the Dallas Police Department since May 12th. The Dallas Police Department passed it on to the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Malcolm Wallace, convicted in a 1951 murder and suspected in others, was reportedly killed in an automobile accident in 1971. He has been linked to the death of Texas Agriculture Department investigator Henry Marshall, said to be close to uncovering felonious behavior by Billy Saul Estes and Lyndon Johnson. The fact of Wallace's fingerprint in the so-called sniper's nest does not, of course, mean he pulled the trigger that day. Brown cited FBI fingerprint expert Sebastian Latona's testimony to the Warren Commission, in which Latona said that fingerprints can only be taken from a surface like cardboard within 24 hours of its origin. Furthermore, Wallace's print at the crime scene is hard evidence that corroborates the circumstantial evidence of Loy Factor's eyewitness account of Wallace's presence, said Texas researcher Richard Bartholomew. Loy Factor has claimed that he, Wallace, Lee Oswald, and a woman identified as Ruth Ann were present on the TSBD 6th floor as part of an assassination team. According to Bartholomew, the same question was raised by the Dallas police on May 12th. The FBI's own textbook on fingerprint science teaches the basic concept of fingerprint evidence used in criminal investigation, he said. Those who have an innocent reason to have handled the objects in question are eliminated from suspicion if their latent prints are present. Did Wallace have an innocent reason? No. Mark and I posted our progress, or lack thereof, on our website, much to the chagrin of the Texas group and everyone else who looked to the fingerprint evidence to be the final word in the JFK conspiracy. Although I made an attempt to contact Nathan Darby to discuss our findings, I was unable to find him. I should have looked harder, because when I finally did meet Darby years later, I was forced to look much harder at what our experts had determined. I first saw and heard Nathan Darby as he appeared in his interview in the Guilty Men documentary. I was very impressed with his confidence in his fingerprint match. It's a match, he insisted. There's no doubt about it. The finger that made the latent print and the finger that was on the fingerprint card is the same finger. If I was to die today, my final decision would be, it's a match.
Nathan Darby is one of the most experienced fingerprint experts in the United States, with 35 years service in the U.S. military and the City of Austin Police Department.
I didn't know where it came from, and a week or 10 days later, I called the party that had brought it over and said, well, it's a match. The finger that made the ink print also made the latent, and we called that a match or identified. And there was no question about it. They matched.
3 years later, Nathan Darby readdressed the same evidence and reconfirmed his original findings.
I don't know why they couldn't say that the thing didn't match. It did match. There's no question about it. My experience, I've just had too much experience. I know what I'm talking about. I'm positive. No question about it. My dying declaration, if I was to drop dead right now, they match.
After watching Darby confidently defend his work, I decided to again try to contact him. This time I was successful. Several phone conversations with this wonderful gentleman convinced me that we must meet in person. Nathan invited Mark and I to Austin, and we accepted. We spent the better part of a day with Mr. Darby at his home in Austin. There he explained, as would be a school teacher, the various aspects of fingerprint analysis to us. He related step by step how he was presented with the prints, how he was never told to what case the fingerprints were related. He was paid as a professional for a professional comparison. Later, he gave us notes and details of a third analysis of the print evidence. Since I am not an expert, I have no way of confirming Darby's print results, but what I can say is that his explanation of the evidence, his confidence in his results, and his sterling character, along with my personal examination of the prints, lead me to the conclusion that the match is correct. But you be the judge. Look at the material that follows. Some of it has never been published. Before his death, however, it was Nathan Darby's wish that you see what we saw. Step 1. Observing the condition of the prints. The first print shown on page 213 is the rolled print of Malcolm Wallace taken during his booking for the 1951 murder case. It is definitely the clearest of the two prints we will be examining. The second print shown is page 214, box 29 print. So take a look at these two prints. Now, look at your left little finger. Amazingly, all of the information that lays before you was transferred from that tiny area. The rolled print was, of course, made under controlled, nearly perfect conditions in a police station under the supervision of a trained fingerprint officer. The latent print on page 214 was found on a cardboard box at the southeast window of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. It was made visible by chemical process. Before that, it was just a smudge of oils from someone's left little finger. Its clarity appears to be very poor. Much of it is indistinguishable, but amazingly, a portion of the print holds together with some amount of clarity, enough perhaps for a trained examiner to draw a conclusion about the print. Because of the condition of the print, I firmly believe that there will never be a consensus of opinion on this fingerprint evidence. Step 2, examining the most striking similarity. The first feature of these prints that I'm about to point out is, in my personal opinion, the most interesting. This area of the print seems to jump out as unusual, an area that is blank with no ridges or detail visible. Darby suggests that this could be an injury area. Whatever the cause of this void, it is visible on both the rolled print and, more importantly, on print 29, the latent print. Find point number 7 on the rolled print. You see point number 7, that little dot? Point 7 sits near the bottom right corner of the gray outlined box above. Note that at the top of the box we see 3 or 4 descending ridges that stop abruptly, point number 4 being one of them. Notice how at the bottom of the box a similar pattern occurs. Several ascending ridges stop abruptly, point 9 being one of them. Points 9 and 10 form a stubby line with point number 7 being a small dot above it, much like the dot over an I. Now let's compare the latent print, the box 29 print. Again, point number 7 sits near the bottom right corner of the gray outlined box of the latent print. Note that similarly, at the top of the box, we again see 3 or 4 descending ridges that stop abruptly, point number 4 being one of them. The similarities are obvious, even though this area is located in a very degraded portion of the print. Notice now that at the bottom of the box, a similar pattern occurs in the latent print. Several ascending ridges stop abruptly, point 9 being one of them. And, like the rolled print, points 9 and 10 form a stubby line with point number 7 being a small dot above it, like the dot over the letter I. Step number 3, examining a second striking similarity. Another area of similarity, like the first, involves a void area where ascending and descending ridges terminate abruptly. Notice that this second area is to the left and slightly down from the first void area. Point number 5 clearly terminates downward into this area. Point number 1, which looks like an upside down V, points upward into this area. Blow up of latent print number 29. The question here is, do points 1 and 5 match? Do you see the void area in both prints? Step number 4, examining the 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 combo. First, find the little point number 7 in the above blow-up of the rolled print. Now count 2 ridges to the right and stop. You should be at point 6. If you were to jump the gap downwards, you would land on point number 8. But instead of going down, follow the ridge from point number 6 upwards to the end of the ridge. You are now at point number 3. Next, jump to the next point upwards, landing on point number 2. Now let's try the same path on the latent print above. First, find the little point number 7 in the above blow-up of the rolled print. Count 2 ridges to the right and stop. You are now at point number 6, right? If you were to jump the gap downwards, you would land on point number 8, but instead of going down, follow the ridge from point 6 upwards to the end of the ridge. You are now at point 3. Next, jump to the next point upwards, landing on point number 2. Some may say the gap between points 2 and 3 appear connected. However, this anomaly is due to the poor condition of the latent print. Step number 5, examining point number 22 and its neighbors. Point number 22 is an ending ridge. It is shown above, descending between 2 other ridges where it ends. To the right of point number 22 is point 21, which descends down to 17. To the right and upwards from 17 is a small dot, number 16. Follow the ridge upwards from that little dot 16, and you come to point number 15. Jumping the gap from 15 brings you to 13. Move one ridge to the left of 13 will bring you to point 14. Now let's compare the latent print, number 29. Point number 22 on the poor quality latent above appears to touch the ridge to the right of it, but Darby notes that this is not the case. Most likely this is a ridge ending, not a bifurcation as it appears. To the right of 22 is point number 21, which also appears blurred. It descends down to 17. To the right and upwards from 17 is a small dot, number 16. Follow the ridge upwards from 16 and you come to 15. Jumping the gap up from 15 brings you to 13. Move one ridge to the left of 13. It will bring you to point 14. You still with me? You might have to play this more than once to get the whole idea. Stick with it. Or just jump ahead. Let's look at some more of point number 22's neighbors on the next page. For this final section of our print review, I will use the last work that Darby did with the fingerprint. He mailed these to me a few weeks after our visit with him in Austin. Using a different set of numbers, Darby concentrates on points 61 through 67, combined with old points number 22 and number 23. I have cleaned up the numbered squares, but left the note that he added on both the rolled print and the latent, namely, quote, OK for 22 to touch ridge to right on the latent print. Here's the blow-up of the Roland print, Darby's last analysis. Start with point number 66. Now drop down to the next ridge and follow it to the right until it ends at point 61. Next, drop down to the next ridge and go left until you come to the gap that separates point number 62 and 63. Drop down one more ridge to point 64, which is a bifurcation or fork in the road, so to speak, that trails off to the left and ends at number 65. At this point, I will quote directly from Nathan's handwritten notes to me. Start at 64, right and down on ridge 64, 64 ends, count 4 ridges right, up 4th ridge, number 22, is 1 ridge to the right. Let's compare the latent print with the details cited above. Here's the blow-up of the latent print. Start with point 66. See it barely sticking out from the indistinguishable mess on the left side of the print? Now drop down to the next ridge and follow it to the right until it ends at point number 61. Next, drop down to the ridge, the next ridge, and go left until you come to the gap that separates points 62 and 63. Drop down one more ridge to point number 64, which is a bifurcation or fork in the road that trails off to the left and ends at point number 65. There is a lot of blotchiness in this area from point number 63 area on down, but you can still see bifurcation starting at point number 64. Again, quoting from Nathan's handwritten notes, start at number 64, right and down on ridge number 64. Number 64 ends, count 4 ridges up 4th ridge, number 22, one ridge to the right. Can you see point 22 there to the right? Notice the handwritten note to the right. Okay, for 22 to touch ridge on right. That's what he said. Nathan's years of experience led him to determine that point number 22 is not touching the ridge to the right. The poor quality of the latent print simply gives the untrained eye the impression that the two are touching, when in actuality 22 is an ending ridge. Similar determinations are made quite often by experienced fingerprint experts. Take, for example, the case of the fingerprints of Lee Harvey Oswald. During the Warren Commission hearings, Sebastian Latona, the FBI fingerprint expert, showed the commissioners two charts showing the comparison of Oswald's fingerprint and a latent print found on a paper bag found in the sniper's nest area. Mr. Eisenberg, Mr. Latona, in making these ridge counts, do you also pay attention to the so-called, let's say, geographical relation, the spatial relation to the 2 points? Mr. Latona, very definitely. Now, it does not always follow that the so-called geographical position will coincide exactly the same. That would be caused because of variations in the pressure used when the print was made. For example, when you make a print on a fingerprint card, when the ink print was made, the print was made for the specific person of recording all the ridge details. When the print was left on the paper bag, it was an incidental impression. The person was not trying to leave a print. In fact, he probably did not even know he left one. So the pressure which is left, or the position of the finger when it made the print, will be a little different. Accordingly, the geographical area of the points themselves will not always coincide, but they will be in the general position the same. Mr. Eisenberg. So, Mr. Latona, without going into detail, there are some apparent dissimilarities on the two sides of that chart. Can you explain why there should be apparent dissimilarities? Mr. Latona. The dissimilarities are caused by the type of material on which the print was left, because of the pressure, because of the amount of material which is on the finger when it left the print. They would not always be exactly the same. Here again, there appears a material difference in the sense there is a difference in coloration. This is because of the fact that the contrast in the latent print is not as sharp as it is in the inked impression, which is definite black on white, whereas here we have more or less brown on a light brown. Mr. Eisenberg. Now, Mr. Latona, when you find an apparent dissimilarity between an inked and a latent print, how do you know that it is caused by absorption of the surface upon which the latent print is placed, or by failure of the finger to exude material, rather than by the fact that you have a different fingerprint? Mr. Latona. That is simply by sheer experience. Mr. Eisenberg. Would you say, therefore, that the identification of a fingerprint is a task which calls for an expert interpretation, as opposed to a simple point-by-point laying out, which a layman could do? Mr. Latona. Very definitely so, yes. The final analysis of the Malcolm Wallace fingerprint will be made by you, the reader. I've given you the printed information that Darby entrusted to me. You have examined his expert interpretation. I hope that the issue has been clarified for you. In his last communication with me, Nathan wrote these words: "There are 34 matching points. How can there be any question?" I believe you, Mr. Darby.
So there's no question in your mind.
If I was dying right now, I would say I was given an ink print and a latent print. I don't know where they came from. Those prints that were given me matched in my affidavit.
Wow.
That's how positive I am.